Welcome back to another episode of the Lonely Liberal Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Zankin, and I'm so happy to have you here. How's it going? How you doing? We got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about what the heck is going to happen in Maine now that Graham Platner has dropped out. For those who don't know, the Democratic Senate candidate, Graham Platner, has officially suspended his campaign. He did so just, I think, yesterday. And it comes at the end of all these allegations, all of this drama. It officially got too much to bear, and he called it. It's over for him. So now a lot of people are going, well, so what's next? Is Susan Collins, the Republican, just going to win by default? Is this a mad dash? Blah, blah, blah. And it's all great questions, and this is what we're going to talk about in the main of the show, all this stuff. It's very interesting and very juicy. But before we jump into it, I just wanted to quickly call back to an episode I did a few weeks ago, which I think was just called What to Do with Graham Platner. And that episode came out, I think, obviously before the major allegations that happened just a couple days ago, but it was when this was starting to become clear that Graham Platner maybe didn't have the best judgment. And while his candidacy and his messaging was really spot on and why he did so well, in my opinion, his personal kind of character was starting to become clear, and it became kind of evident that this was going to be a problem for him. Now, I'm not trying to take a victory lap that I called it, because frankly, at the end of the episode, I said if he's still a candidate come the election, I would vote for him over Collins, and I encourage people to do so. It's more to show that this stuff matters. And again, a bigger symptom of not only how important, not just messaging is, but the caliber of human is, right, in a well-functioning democracy, but how vulnerable the Democratic Party is when it doesn't have its ducks in a row, right? When it becomes Bernie versus Schumer and they're both going rogue and there's random kind of proxy wars happening within the Democratic Party. Because then what ultimately happens is you have Janet Mills on one hand, and say what you will about her, she's an 80-year-old woman who effectively represents everything that the progressive left does not like with the Democratic Party. And then you have Graham Platner, who is saying everything that the progressive left wants to hear, inspiring people, getting people excited to go vote, but let's be honest, has no political experience whatsoever, and other than really loving Maine and sounding like a tough guy, didn't really have any politics, and clearly wasn't vetted very thoroughly, right? So it's just a reminder that a united Democratic Party is a much better one. And obviously, it can't just continue to be the Schumer side and the Bernie side. They all need to kind of coalesce into something more unified and something that actually speaks to their own party's base, in my opinion. But that's more of a recap. And again, the reason why I'm talking about it off the top of the show today is this theme I think you'll feel as we kind of go through what's happening now after Platner's dropped out. So we're going to talk about how it actually ended. And it actually wasn't really just the press, I'll tell you that. The mechanics of the electoral system that are happening behind the scenes, as it were. The people who are actually saying they're going to run now and replace Platner. And finally, my ultimate thesis of the Democrats need to stop making Maine a proxy war, quote unquote. So it's a great show. Make sure you like and subscribe. I'm really happy to have you. And without further ado, let's get to it. All right. So on Monday, July 6th, Politico and CNN reported that a woman, Graham Platner, dated, I think 4 or 5 years ago, roughly 5 years ago, had raped her while heavily intoxicated. Now, Platner has denied all these allegations, but that was the accusation. And within hours of this, basically all of his endorsements collapsed. From Bernie, from Elizabeth Warren, from Ro Khan, all these people. And it's because Zoran, Abdul in Michigan, like a lot of these progressive folks all basically said we can't keep it going and he needs to withdraw. And because the fact is sexual assault was the red line and it was starting to look like it could have potentially been crossed. And What's so interesting about this whole saga, and we'll talk more about this with Rick in a recap show, is that it's the framing of everything is really interesting. Because originally, when the New York Times kind of released its first story a couple weeks ago, which what my episode that I was just referencing was mainly kind of driven from, a lot of people on the left, and kind of frankly including me, not as directly, but kind of insinuated that this is some sort of establishment takedown on Platner, who is this kind of rebel without a cause, and why are they doing this? And now knowing that the New York Times actually interviewed the woman who ended up going to Politico and not emphasizing her story in their article, now there's counter narratives that actually the Times were helping Platner. And it's all, they were actually bearing the lead and getting out in front of this. And it's just more proof that trying to look at the news this way and try to coming up with conspiracy theories of the motivations of all these people is silly, and it just fills a machine of insanity. So something that I've definitely taken from this, that even when I start taking the bait, it's just a bad habit, and we just need to have a little bit more skepticism and discipline with our tinfoil hat brain. But what's really, really interesting about this demise, I guess, is that according to Platner, and I believe him when he says this, the kill shot effectively on his campaign wasn't this. It wasn't these allegations. It wasn't the media. It was the money. And what that means is that Schumer, obviously Chuck Schumer, the Senate minority leader, vowed that they will not invest a single dollar in the Maine Senate race if Platner remains on the ballot. And the Maine Dem Super PAC threatened to pull $24 million earmarked for Maine. Now, Platner didn't take money from PACs, so you could say, well, who cares? I'm sure he would have let them do their thing, even if he didn't directly coordinate with them. So this became very tough for Graham, because if you can't fundraise and you can't get money and you can't get access to voter data, you're cooked. And that's exactly what he talked about in his 11-minute exit video that he released on Wednesday. The quote unquote was, "We believe that for the movement to continue, it can't be me." Now, Graham in this video said the establishment was using these allegations as an excuse, and it's a pretty crazy claim to say that because he wants Medicare for all, they've invented sexual assault and rape allegations. That's pretty wild. But, so, I mean, grain of salt on Graham's establishment versus us. But maybe he thinks that, who knows, it's all allegations, all of, effectively, you make your decision, right, on what you think. What's also really interesting, as of the recording of the show, which is Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern, he actually hasn't officially withdrawn yet. He told his staff he intends to file it on Monday, July 13th, which is literally the deadline. So in Maine, that's the thing. So if he doesn't do it by then, he becomes the candidate by default. And so, even though he publicly declared it in his Twitter video, he literally hasn't. And I think that's due to a want of leverage in terms of who emerges as his replacement. And you could argue, well, he doesn't want to be disloyal to the people who supported him. And, these are real people who really were canvassing over, very righteous messaging. So I understand that. He's a messy guy, and the whole situation with him is incredibly messy. And it's the end of the Platner saga. And while I will not miss him if any of this stuff is true, I will miss his Nick Offerman impression of Graham Platner here in his ads that I got all the time on Instagram. So, like I just said, so in Maine, there's this rule that the primary nominated candidate must withdraw by 5 p.m. on the second Monday in July. So that's July 13th for the party named to be replaced, right? And then the party has until the fourth Monday, which is July 27th, to fill the vacancy. So they've got, 15, 20 days to get this going? And on Wednesday, so yesterday, 100 plus state committee members voted to hold a nominating convention, which is around 600 delegates, 500 appointed proportionately from Maine's counties, and 100, I think, state committee members to become kind of the body of who makes the decision. And that might sound confusing to you. I just said a bunch of stuff. What that isn't is a statewide caucus. So what that is that those 600 people, which is these, again, Maine county delegates and state committee things, they're the ones who are going to be voting for the replacement, not an actual election where people participate. Now, we've seen how this goes before. Obviously, I'm sure you got kind of chills down your spine if you're a liberal with Kamala, right? She didn't actually get voted as the replacement for Biden. She got nominated with these electorates in a very, very similar way. So this isn't great. I mean, I'm going to just be honest here. There's no way to make a 600-person convention representative a, person of the people, right? I mean, no doubt about it. If you want to make an accusation that this is happening behind the scenes and this is back from politics and this is DC having its way in Maine, having a 600-person delegate make the vote for who is the next candidate isn't helping the case. Great. So not good. And like I said, this is just like Kamala. So what are we going to do? It's also just absolutely crazy. And this is a little off topic, but I can't help myself but think about just how just 2 years ago, we saw the Democrats literally have to replace their presidential candidate and scramble to figure out how to do that, and then get a lot of criticism for not doing it very democratically. And then in Maine, in the midterms, which by all means is the biggest Senate election for the Democrats this election by far, simply because Susan Collins is old, unpopular, and Maine doesn't vote for Trump, right? So this is a great opportunity for Dems. And what do? And so in this kind of haze over the last day, a few candidates have declared that they will run. And I got 3 people definitely. And I've got a couple people who have been floated around. So the people who are definitely who have put their name in the hat, you can say, are the following. We have Troy Jackson, 58 years old. He's a logger in Maine. He's a longtime state legislator and former leader of the Maine Senate. Bernie endorsed him this year in a governor race, and he campaigned along Platner. So he was kind of like a Platner buddy. He didn't win the governor nomination, right? And he declared within hours that he was going to do it. So he's become kind of the Platner spiritual successor, and not in the sense that his person is the same as Platner, but in the sense of the messaging, the anti-establishment, in terms of the anti-money in politics kind of rhetoric. He's probably the spiritual successor for that. He is trying to say, I'm like Platner, but with a political record, right? Working class, not kind of doing this weird, donor class stuff. But he's actually been in politics his whole life, so it means he's been properly vetted, right? It doesn't mean, he's not likely to fall for this, the same issues that happen with Platner are not likely to happen with Troy Jackson because he's been in politics for so long. So he's the kind of Bernie acolyte in the wing, I guess, on deck. Then you have Nirav Shah, the moderate lane, I'd say, the former Maine CDC director, in COVID actually, finished second in June's gubernatorial primary and declared Thursday. Now, interesting, his launch kind of caused a little controversy because he actually said to the people who supported Graham, you have a place in this campaign. Now, Nirav isn't as anti-establishment as someone like Troy Jackson and probably won't get the Bernie endorsement like Troy Jackson, but is definitely not as establishment-y as someone like Mills. And then you have kind of out of nowhere Dan Kleben, or Kleben, I don't know how you say that. Sorry, Dan. He's similar to Platner, has no political experience. He was the co-founder of Maine Beer Co. He briefly ran for a seat last year, but he dropped out and endorsed Mills. He declared Wednesday. He's the risk profile that literally just exploded. He's never been vetted. I'm not saying he has any allegations. I'm just saying we don't know anything about Dan in a political sense other than he owns a beer company, which is cool. A couple other names have been floated around. We have Shenna Bellows. She's the Secretary of State. She's very progressive, and she's expressed interest but hasn't declared. The problem with her is she literally ran against Collins in 2014 and lost hugely. Like, she got absolutely smoked. I don't think she's the answer. Sorry, Shenna. Then you have Jordan Wood, former Capitol Hill Chief of Staff, ran third in the 2nd District House primary. A lot of people think he's like Platner, but untested. And there's a couple other people like David Costello, State Rep Vali Geiger, I think. I don't know. But the one name you haven't heard me say as I've gone through the docket is Miss Janet Mills. I know a lot of people I've talked to have kind of assumed that she's just been waiting in the wing and will, emerge from the shadows to take her place on the throne. But no, she can't. Not only did she not win the primary, she literally dropped out in April. So she didn't even really run. And the reason why she dropped out is because she was doing terribly. Platner won against a token opponent, didn't really win. And apparently in these negotiations that the Platner campaign is having with the Democrats behind the scenes is that she cannot be the candidate. They do not want Janet Mills to be the candidate because she's the symbol of everything his movement ran against. And I think that's a smart idea. Whether you think Janet Mills is a good governor or not, I've actually had the pleasure of meeting Janet Mills. She seemed like a lovely lady, but she is an 80-year-old woman and is without a doubt a corporate Dem. So don't worry about Janet. She ain't coming back. But all of this spiel, who this and the endorsements and this, it's getting so exhausting. And I think, again, like I said off the top of the show, Mills versus Platner was never really about Maine. Mills was Schumer's candidate. Platner became Bernie's. And Maine voters got a national ideological proxy war instead of a vetted competitive field. And both failures flew from the same cause, right? The establishment failed to recruit a real bench, and the movement failed to vet its champion. Because everyone was fighting this national war about what the Democratic Party should be, rather than actually represent Maine the way they should. And what's so stressful and so irritating is that it's literally happening again with these new guys. Like I said, Troy Jackson, he's already got the Bernie endorsement. The Our Revolution group has already backed him. Shaw, I'm the moderate. The Our Revolution people said to the Democratic establishment, this isn't your opening. It's not like anyone's pretending again. It's, again, establishment v. not. And I understand. I mean, I'm a very progressive dude. I know our listeners are very progressive. I'm not pro-Schumer in the slightest. In fact, the reason why this show is called Lonely Liberal is because people like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries drive me nuts. It's just, this isn't working. They need to work together because they're not asking what Maine Democrats want. I mean, are they? They have a delegate of 600 people that are going to vote for this person? I mean, has that worked in the past? Did that get the traction with Kamala? And I just think this is a sign. This is a bad sign. And I think, again, the way you get good candidates is if the party actually understands who it's trying to support and listens to its voters. So the test I'll give you guys who are listening while we watch over the next few weeks is watch which candidate absorbs the other's faction rather than defeats it. Shaw reaching out to Platner's movement is a good move, like politically, because if Shaw can get them, that's a good win. But whoever wins this likely will kind of break the cycle. And I guess the other thing to keep in mind is, remember who holds the kill switch. The DSCC funding was the ultimatum that killed Platner, not the news, not the drama. So the open question for this convention is, will the National Party let 600 Mainers pick their candidate, or will DC pick it for them? Before we get out of here, though, I want to answer one last question, which is, so does Susan Collins just win this? Is it over, right? Like, am I huffing and puffing for nothing? Because, let's be real, Susan Collins is just going to dog walk whoever wins. I get it. I definitely get it. It definitely feels like that. But is it rational? Is that rational? That's why we do this show, right? What's actually going to happen? Let me tell you the con case first. So, Collins is seeking her 6th term and has survived this narrative of being the most vulnerable Republican every cycle since 1996. She has never lost. And obviously she's never lost because here she is. But what's crazy is every time they say she's going to lose, every freaking time I hear Susan Collins is cooked, nobody likes her, and yet here she is back at it. And if actually you remember, we made a predictions video in January with my good friend Jesse, and he predicted that Susan Collins would win under the ground that she is unbeatable, basically, because of exactly what I just said. Also, what's very not encouraging, right, is in 2020, the last time she was kicking around, as Susan Collins, that is, in an election point of view, Democrats spent the most money they ever had on Sarah Gideon, and Collins won by 9 points. Okay? So she is just really has a lot of sway in Maine. I don't think people who don't live in Maine, I don't live in Maine, but I fortunately have a lot of friends who live in Maine, realize how much Susan Collins really has a stranglehold on that state. She really, really does. And also, obviously, whoever ends up being the candidate doesn't have a lot of time. I mean, it's 4 months isn't no time. You see snap elections happen all the time in the UK, Canada, and stuff like that. But like we saw with Kamala, it isn't easier to have less time. People will have to learn who someone is and get behind them and get excited and all that stuff. But let me give you the pro case, the happy case, the optimistic case, because there is one. It's not just me praying to God that Susan Collins doesn't win, because it is so important. Remember, Kamala won Maine by roughly 7 points in 2024. Trump is broadly very unpopular, and Maine is the only blue-leaning state with a GOP senator. That's all true. When Collins ran originally, she promised she would only run for 2 terms. Now, she's broken that promise, but this is such an easy integrity attack because it's against everything she said she wouldn't do. And, I mean, politician being hypocrite isn't that shocker, but it is a good thing. Also, the primary, the one that Platner had won, did see record turnout. Right? The energy Platner generated is 100% real. And they want to harness this. If they're not stupid, they are going to try to, levy that momentum into a new candidate, right? Also, the Cook Political Reports, Jessica Taylor said this, and she is 100% correct. Virtually any Democrat that does not have a substantial baggage as Platner represents a much better chance against Susan Collins. And I completely agree. Janet Mills uniquely had a tough go because she was old and is a very famous established candidate in politics. A lot of the people that I just rattled off aren't. So they don't have that drama. So it's true. If the Democrats want any chance of retaking the Senate, they need to win Maine. And so you may go, well, we're cooked. Well, maybe, but they need to get a net of 4 seats, right? So Maine, North Carolina, Iowa, Ohio, Alaska, Texas, Michigan, hopefully. Those are all states that are big Trump states, you know? So this is still just by the populace itself their best shot. So the bottom line of this is that Collins definitely became the favorite with all this drama. Of course she did. But she's not safe. And frankly, what makes her safe or not safe is whether Democrats treat the next 2 weeks as a unity project or a faction fight. Let's be real. And that's our show, folks. Thank you so much for listening. What do you think? We think we're cooked? What do you think about Platner? Drama? You let me know either in YouTube comments, by email at media@thelonelyliberal.com. That is media@thelonelyliberal.com. You'll also go to thelonelyliberal.com and look at our silly website and fill out the form. But I'm really curious what y'all think. That's it for me, guys. I'll talk to you very, very soon, likely with Mr. Richard, to talk about the news. But until then, I'll talk to you later. Ciao. See ya.